including some other information on that topic as well. Joining us now, Representative Barry Loudermilk. He is Republican from Georgia, serves the 11th District, and here to talk, amongst other things, budget proposals coming from the administration. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
When you hear the term $54 billion for defense, what goes to your mind?
Well, it's a good start. If you really look at it as your previous guest did, is we're lacking significantly in our military posture. Saw the charts that showed our military spending versus other nations. Look, we are the largest nation in the world as far as military strength. Other nations look to us. We're the most advanced technologically. Those things cost more. Our responsiveness is not just here in the United States, but our allies across the world expect us to be responsive as well. Whether it's NATO, whether it's Israel, whether it's in any other partner we have in the Middle East, our military posture has to be ready to go at a moment's notice. And right now, my son serves in the Army. We're in a situation to where they're having to train in simulators. They don't even have live ammunition to be able to go out into the field and adequately train. You cannot have the world's most influential, most powerful military with the type of responsibilities we have with that type of resources. So
with that number, is there leeway at least available to representatives to increase that number?
I think there is. I mean, as we go through and we look at how our defense posture has deteriorated, and this is coming from the generals. These are the folks that are doing the strategy and the planning, that we're not able to fight a war on multiple fronts right now. And if you look at it, our enemies are vast. It's a more dangerous world than it's been in probably a decade or more. And so we have to be even more vigilant. Look, I give a lot of props and a lot of kudos to those folks that have been holding the line in the military so far with struggling to have the resources that they need. But we are going to have to take a good look at it. We also have to balance. Look, we have a $20 trillion debt right now. So we can't just continue to deficit spend. I think there's a lot that we can do to trim government. We can do a lot in the Department of Defense. I think they have done a good bit of work in getting rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, but there's a lot of reforms that we can do in there. Procurement reform would also cut the cost. You see the president has already started in that by meeting with Lockheed, meeting with Boeing. There's a lot that we can do to trim the cost. We can't go back to those days of the $500 hammer that we saw years ago. So there's some things we can do to trim costs, as well as getting more efficiency out of our military by giving them the right resources.
And is the right way of trimming those costs, have you seen reported potential cuts to State Department programs, potential cuts to EPA programs, perhaps others as well?
Well, we're going to have to. Look, our government is bloated. It is larger than we've ever seen. It has grown into something that it's a closed government. It's not open to the American people. When you look at the size of government and the scope of what it's done, it's unfriendly. In a lot of cases, it doesn't even continue the mission of what these agencies were originally organized to do. And so in a lot of cases, the swamp, as it's been called, and the reason it's been called the swamp is because these agencies more exist to protect their own infrastructure and their own selves than they are actually serving the American people. So we have to open up the government. We can't allow government to continue to be closed. When you look at, you go to any business, or if you go to a restaurant and an employee is just a bad service, they're rude, they're arrogant, you have an avenue to go to that manager, you complain, more than likely they're not going to continue to work in that business because they bring a negative light to that business. But our constituent services operations, they deal with constituents all the time who receive that type of treatment from government employees, but nothing ever seems to change. So we have to be able to trim down government. It can be more efficient. We need to put more load back on the states, as our founders originally intended it to be.
Representative Barry Loudermilk joining us, and your questions to him are available on the phone at 202-741-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats and Independents, 202-748-8002. And you can post thoughts on Twitter at CSPAN WJ. Well, because the State Department deals with programs that deal with foreign relations overall, the EPA takes a look at environmental issues. Is there a danger of cutting too much and perhaps doing undesired effects, I guess, in the long term by means of cutting?
I don't think so. You look at the EPA, and in the last 2 years I've been in Congress, served as the Oversight Subcommittee Chair on Science, Space, and Technology. We've done a lot of investigation into the EPA. You look at some of the things that the EPA has done recently, and I make the argument, look, I believe we should protect the environment. I'm an outdoorsman. I love hunting. I love fishing. I want my grandchildren to continue to be able to go camping as I've done throughout my life. I really believe that we need to protect our environment. But I also believe that the EPA has become counterproductive to that. You look at what's happened recently, just in the last year, we've seen a massive increase in the EPA trying to grow their scope, protect the institution, grow their power instead of protecting the environment. Just last year, the EPA, trying to expand its control over into transportation, to which they're really not given that authority, that broad of authority in transportation, decided that they were going to redefine a trailer, the trailers that hook up to the back of trucks. They redefined that trailers as self-propelled motorized vehicles so they can actually control that market. 2 years ago, they went into Colorado, were told by their own contractor to not excavate the Gold King mine. You would cause a blowout, which would release toxic levels of arsenic and mercury into the water system. Even against their own contractor, the EPA went ahead, they excavated the mine, polluted the river systems in 3 states. So we continue to see this. They buried regulations inside of a diesel truck engine regulation, that these buried regulations would have basically outlawed amateur racing in America. So these types of things, we just see them trying to grow their scope, grow their power, and some unattainable levels. They set ozone levels 2 years ago so high you can't even achieve those levels in the area of the Grand Canyon. So I believe they've grown too big. It's time to shrink the size of these agencies. Let them work with the states, work with Congress, determine what our policy should be. We could work much more efficiently, much more open, and let the idea of the founding fathers, which was the states, which are more responsive and more able to meet the needs of their citizens, let them do the majority of the enforcement and have a smaller, more efficient agency that's coordinating.
And just before we go to calls, when it comes to the EPA, you have legislation to eliminate it altogether.
Well, there's a legislation a colleague of mine introduced and I co-sponsored, because I think this is a good start. It's a good talking point to begin major reforms of these agencies. Our agencies are too large. This is what has been referred to as the swamp, and it's just not from Donald Trump. People across America are seeing this. Their government is closed. They want a government that's open, that's responsive to them. And one of the reasons it's so bloated, it's so big, it's so wrapped up in red tape, that it's not responsible to the average American citizen. They don't look at what their regulations and their policies doing for the average American, who an average American family now is paying $15,000 a year in hidden regulatory costs. So our legislation starts a process. As you know, the legislative process happens. Rarely does a piece of legislation resemble itself by the time it goes through the process. So let's start off with an idea, and then let's build on that with the idea of we need major reforms in these agencies.
The first call for you comes from Fayette, Alabama, independent line. Michael, go ahead. You're on with our guest.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Although I phoned the independent line and I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, there is no way that I voted for President Trump. Unfortunately, his budget proposal bears out my suspicions. I don't know why too many of us white able-bodied white males, I'm actually slightly disabled, thought that were I would say bamboozled by his statements on the campaign trail that he would bring jobs back, let alone that he was really for us average ordinary Americans. Here are my concerns. How much of this federal defense budget goes towards U.S. overseas bases in friendly democratic allies, Japan, South Korea, Western Europe, etc.? How many of those do we still need? Why is the emphasis on increased conventional weapons defense spending versus benefits programs for current veterans? When too many people say the word veterans, they imply retired veterans. And VA hospitals. I had a paternal grandfather who was in 2 VA hospitals, and there's an Air Force base 40 miles from us in Columbus, Mississippi, a medium-sized town city of Columbus, Mississippi, where they could use those benefits programs. Also...
Okay, caller, we'll leave it there only because you put a lot there for the guest.
Yeah, it's serving in the military. I can tell you right now, even though I do not believe that those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, the men and women in the uniform we could ever pay them what they're worth. But we do have one of the best paid, most compensated militaries in the world. And that's one of the reasons our costs are so high, because we appreciate so much what they do for us, and we appreciate the sacrifices that they make. And you bring up a good point. We are not doing enough for our veterans. But the problem is the corruption in the Veterans Administration. It is too big. It is closed. It exists to protect its own self. Look, there's a lot of doctors, nurses that are in the Veterans Administration that are doing a lot for our veterans. But the administration has been corrupt, a lot like a lot of these agencies. This is the swamp we're talking about. We can save the taxpayers a lot of money and improve the service that are going to our veterans and to our military if we go in and we remove the top-heavy aspect of all these organizations and make them more responsive, more open to the American people.
Arkansas is where we're going to next. Republican line, Bonnie, hello.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I was wondering how much of our munitions, military munitions, and military products and everything are purchased from China and other places instead of manufactured here in the United States.
Well, I don't have the exact number of that. That's something that we can't obtain, but I do know that the majority of what we use in the military is either developed and manufactured here in the United States or by one of our allied partners. I mean, it would make not a lot of sense that you buy a weapon system, a complete weapon system from a foreign nation that's an aggressor to the United States. But she makes a very good point here that we do need to make sure that we are trusting the technology that we put in the field. When I was in the military, we used to have a saying that says, when you're pinned down into a foxhole and you have incoming fire, remember that your weapon was made by the lowest bidder. And so we've even though we've had the procurement laws in place, I think we do need to review those. We do need to look at it and make sure that the weapon systems that we give our military are the best available, not just the cheapest, not just where we can get trim a little bit here and there to save a few dollars, but put our military at risk. We do have to have the absolute best weapon systems and munitions in the world.
Robert from Smyrna, Georgia, Democrats line.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I can say this quickly, but the two things I'm going to say may sound unrelated. Here we go. When I was a young man, my first girlfriend, I fell in love with her. I thought she was the greatest thing ever. But then I found out she wasn't the one for me. She went and took off with another guy. Okay, hold that in your mind. About 15 years ago, I went to Norway just traveling. The bartender walked up to me and said, what can I do for you? He said it in such perfect English. I said, where are you from? He said, America. I said, what are you doing here? He says, I come over here, I get a job, they pay for my education. Now, you can get an education here by going into the military, as long as you're willing to lay your life on the line. My question is this: when is America going to start loving me? Until I learned that there were other countries out there who were willing to do things for me before I have to put my life on the line, I didn't realize that this country depended on me to do that before they do anything for me. Thanks a lot.
Well, I think the caller's a little misguided in there that you have to lay your life on the line to enjoy the benefits of this nation. Look, we're not Norway, we're not China, we're not any other nation out there. We're a nation that's built on the aspect of freedom. The freedom for you to be able to achieve whatever you put your mind toward and work toward. Look, there are more people who have access to higher education in America than anywhere else in the world. Why? Because we have more schools, more universities. We have private universities. We have public universities. We have state-controlled universities. Look, we have the ability for anybody to achieve. Look, if I would make the argument that if all these other nations provided so much more opportunity than America, you wouldn't have so many people that are trying and striving to get to America today. And look, we do ask a lot of our military people. We ask them to put their lives on the line to defend that freedom that we do have, the freedom of opportunity in this nation.
From Princeton, New Jersey, Democrats line. This is Greg for our guest.
Yeah, hi. A couple of fact checks. The employment for the federal government has fallen steadily. It's the lowest it's been since 1962, when its peak was 1969, and even civilian employment was highest in the end of the Reagan years at about 3 million. Now it's at about 2.6 million, about 400,000 less. So just a little fact checking what you said up front, that's completely ridiculous. The other thing was what the fellow said about Norway. Hey, we have a choice to be more like Norway if we want to. If we want to continue empire building with incredible amounts of spending on the military that we're doing to extend empire and maintain empire, sure, we could do that, but we could do these other things instead and still have a strong military. We could cut the military by a full third and still be massively bigger than anybody else in combination. And you know that, don't you, Congressman? The other thing is, I would mention as the last thing, that these regulations about the EPA, these regulations protect us. Some of them might be a little ham-handed or poorly written, but they protect us. And there are two things that I saw that the Trump administration signed into law. It maybe came out of Congress or maybe it was a rule. I can't remember. These mining rules. The first was now we can again, isn't this wonderful? We can again blow the tops off of mountaintops in West Virginia, where I come from, and pour that into streams so we can get a dying energy source, coal, that we're not going to be using in 20 years. Isn't that wonderful? That's just great.
We'll let our guests respond.
Okay. You know, a lot of people take the idea, and I have in the past too, that all these regulations exist to protect us. But when you really look at it, and originally the EPA, they did a lot of good. When I was in the military, I traveled to Los Angeles. You could hardly breathe in Los Angeles because of all the smog. Some of the regulations that came out of the EPA working with the states have cleared that up. They've done some good. But it gets to a point where it's diminishing returns. And when you look at he was mentioning the regulations that protect us. There are some that protect us, but you get to a certain point where they close government off, and that's where we are today. Look at Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank, the idea of Dodd-Frank was to protect us against evil Wall Street. But in reality, what it's done is closed off the economy to the average Americans. As a small business owner before I came to Congress, I nearly lost my business because I lost access to small business loans that I needed to be able to continue to grow my business. Ended up laying off half of the people because the laws that we have in place right now, they protect those that are on the inside. Look, we want to open up the economy to every American. It should be open. You should be able to grow a business and live the American dream and let it thrive. I'd much rather to take the economy away from big government here in Washington, D.C., put it back in the hands of the local people and let it grow and thrive locally, which is more responsible to the American people. The problem you have is when these regulations are built and grown here in Washington, D.C., which lives inside of a bubble, which is separate from the average American citizen out there, the taxpayer, we become unresponsive. It gets to a point where we just continue to grow a government that is closed off from the American people, that really doesn't want to hear from the American people, and it doesn't take into account the effect that these regulations have on the American people. Look, we want to break down these government obstacles and open up the government, open up the economy for Americans, make healthcare affordable for everyone. But what's happened now, these regulations simply grow the organizations of which impose those regulations.
From West Virginia, Republican line, Robert, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment about the Social Security, how possible to take care of it, and the money for the Border Patrol and fence line. On Social Security, I believe Donald Trump could take a lot of the government buildings and properties that they don't use, that are setting aside, and sell them to the public, which would take care of the Social Security, and plus pay interest on your Social Security later on in the future. And for the Border Patrol, and also to pay for the border personnel and the fence line, he could take all the money. It's been seized from the cartels, all the money, and then been sent to the Treasury, and send it to have it transferred to the Border Patrol to pay for the fence and everything, all the drug money.
Thanks, caller.
Well, he makes a very good point about the size and scope of our government right now. We have what I call here in Washington, D.C., a lot of ivory towers with a lot of folks that sit in these ivory towers. Look, when the rest of America was in a recession, Washington, D.C. wasn't. There was continual growth going. In fact, I joked around with some family members this week. I said, you know what the national bird of Washington is? It's the crane, because of so many cranes around Washington, D.C., even now. Look, as government grows, the facilities to house the government employees continues to grow. And when I mentioned earlier that government is bigger now than it's ever been, it's not just the number of employees. It's the size and the scope. The amount of money that we're spending on government has grown. And so as we trim down the size of this government, which we can run much more efficiently, we can run a better government that is more responsive to the American people with a whole lot less bureaucracy and red tape. As we trim the size of government, then we'll be able to do some of the, look at some of these ideas like the caller just mentioned of getting rid of some of our holdings. Look, when you go to Utah, 90% of the land in Utah is owned by the federal government. Not only does that take a whole lot away from Utah, but it takes a lot away from their potential tax revenue as a state because you can't tax any federal property. So he actually brings up a good point. We need to look at new and fresh ideas for America's government and the American people. And that's what I think that this presidency at least brings in, is a thinking outside the box that will enable people like me. I'm only my second term in Congress, but we have some ideas that we're bringing forward that's actually beginning to have a look by the White House and by our leadership is, look, let's bring some new ideas of reforming our government to make it more responsive and open. Do
those ideas include entitlement reform?
At some point, we're going to have to look at that. We're not doing that immediately, but when you look at the insolvency of every program that we have, we're going to have to reform things in the future. The president is not looking at that right away because there's some more immediate problems we have. Obamacare is collapsing. There's been some talk about, do we just go ahead and let it collapse? I don't believe we should do that. I believe it's our responsibility to do what's right for the American people. We have to fix America's healthcare system. Look, I tell people that if you were to take the laws that govern our health insurance program under Obamacare and apply it to your cell phone, I mean, think of what you get then. The government telling you what kind of phone you can have. You wouldn't have a new phone coming out every 6 months. They would have to approve everything, what apps you would have on the phone. If you used a lot of data, you used your cell phone a lot, you would have to have unlimited data plan. Well, that's a Cadillac plan, so we're going to tax you more for that. And oh, by the way, if with the new price for you to pay for your phone, and we tell you what apps you can have on it, it's not even worth for you to have a phone, we're going to tax you if you don't even own a phone. I mean, no one would accept that, but we'd accept it with our healthcare system. And we've seen the price of premiums go up. We see the deductions going higher and higher. In fact, I had a hospital group visit me not too long ago that said, look, our number one agenda for you is going to be repeal Obamacare. We can't afford it anymore. Even though we have more people with insurance coming to the hospital, they can't afford the deductible. So we're not getting paid either way.
So a replacement plan right away. Is that in your thinking?
I don't think you can do a replacement plan right away because it's so complex. We can't tear the rug out from under the people that do have coverage under Obamacare. But we can make health care more affordable, more readily available. Look, I think we can have a healthcare system to where you choose your insurance plan just like you would your phone system. What does it do for you, and what can I afford? And we can bring those rates down, but it's going to take time. The first thing we have to do is remove those government-imposed barriers that are keeping people from choosing themselves what they want. That's what repealing Obamacare would do. But there's a lot of that we don't need to replace. I mean, there's a lot of the bad parts of Obamacare that we shouldn't replace with more federal law, but push it back to the states that are more responsive to the people, that are more in tune with what the people need. And again, make this whole thing open. Put the people back in charge again. Empower the people to make decisions for themselves, not a big bureaucracy in Washington out of an ivory tower doing that.
Our guest served in the U.S. Air Force for 8 years. He was the former owner of an information technology services business. Also served in the Georgia Senate and the House of Representatives. He's Representative Barry Loudermilk. Representative of Georgia, serves the 11th District. Alexandria, Virginia, independent line. Go ahead.
Good morning. Just a comment. I find it rich that the Republican Party now in power wants to cut multiple agencies to fund the Defense Department that is grossly overbloated and has areas that needs to be cut and trimmed down. Just from perspective, a study was done that came out a few months ago that found $125 billion in waste in the Defense Department. And rather than taking action, the officials at the Defense Department buried the report. How are we going to improve our Defense Department if you're just going to keep throwing money at it with no efficiency measurement within the programs?
Well, caller makes a very good point there. There is no one who has been more forceful on reforming the Department of Defense procurement reform, auditing the Department of Defense, making sure we have efficiencies than the Republicans. We have been leading on that effort. One of the problems that we've had is we haven't had someone in the White House who is willing to do that as well and put the pressure on the Department of Defense. All of these things have to happen. We have to do exactly what he's talking about, gain more efficiency in the Department of Defense. But at the same time, as we do that, we cannot continue to leave America vulnerable. Look, I am a fiscal hawk. I believe that we have to trim our budget. We cannot continue to deficit spend. But right now, we have to overcome the damage that was done over the last 8 years to our military. It is. I just went to Philadelphia this weekend, and I was amazed by the number of naval ships that I saw sitting in a repair yard. It was unbelievable. And my daughter mentioned something about it, and I said, well, that's more than likely some of the ships that we pulled off the water, leaving us more vulnerable.
From Springfield, Virginia, Democrats line, Elise, hello.
Hi there. Mr. Loudermilk, I have to say I agree with probably the last 5 callers on the topics that they touched. I think you're missing something. You keep talking about how Washington is this bubble and this ivory tower and cranes and whatnot. You know who's not listening? It's Congress and the Senate. They aren't listening to the American people. We don't want a Republican Party. We don't want a Democratic Party. We want legislators who are listening to our needs and listening to what they can do from us to serve us. You get paid, and you're not helping us. You're not providing us with the quality work. When you talk about people who are calling up and getting rude responses, do you know who's doing that? When you call up your senator or congressperson, that's what you get. You don't get responses. I think it's really interesting that people are expecting to go to town hall meetings and that person doesn't show up. You want to shove everything back to the states, and you want Washington to be dismantled. Well, how about this? If we can save money, how about if we limit the senators and congressmen 2 per state, and that's it? We would save a boatload of money. And if it's necessary, people can send in referendums. They can put in votes instead of trying to have you all, gerrymander what you think we want.
Okay, caller. Our guest will respond.
Well, first of all, about restructuring Congress, that's set by the Constitution, and I definitely don't think that the caller or anybody in America would like for their voice to be diluted here in Washington, D.C. Look, we are listening to the American people. We are heading in the direction that the majority of American people said we need to change. And look at the polls. The majority of American people say we're going the wrong direction. The majority of American people don't like the taxation that they're paying for the return that they're getting from a bloated government that is unfriendly. It's closed off to them, that controls every aspect of their life, from their economy to their bank account to their health care. Look, people have had enough of that, and they have spoken, and that's what we're responding. And I tell people, look, this caller will benefit from our new, fresh ideas. This caller will benefit from lower taxes, from actually having health care that she can afford. She chooses what she wants. All we're saying is, look, the big government way has not worked. The big government closed system is not working for the American people. They're looking for something new. And we're trying to bring in new, fresh, open ideas to reform this government within the scope of the Constitution. A lot of the things that she was mentioning, and I think they were out of her heart, but yet our founders were very wise in the way that they set up this government, is that this government is responsive to the people, and that you have to have the formation that it is, 2 senators per state, and the House of Representatives represented by population.
The caller I mentioned at Town Hall, there was a recent letter in the Marietta Daily Journal. It was by Carl Kennedy. He said that during the last break, he called your offices. They were closed Monday through Thursday, and asked about town halls, that there were none scheduled. They called the Woodstock office, said that you were planning one in the future. Did you have a town hall during your break, and are you going to have some in the future?
Oh, we have numerous town halls in the first 2 years I was in Congress. We've had the formal town halls. We also have smaller listening sessions throughout the district. We're very involved in the district. One of the things that we need to make sure is that our people are very responsive to callers, to the voice of Americans. And look, we do a lot helping people. We right now have about 350 cases open, just helping constituents with the big unfriendly government that we have right now. And that's a number one priority of our office, is helping our constituents. To do that effectively, we have annual training where we bring everybody together. We have always done this in February, the first break we have, especially with the new administration and the changes. So we brought all of our staff to Washington, D.C., and we spent last week meeting together, training. How can we be more efficient? And so the reason our offices were closed is because we were doing that training. But we were still responding to our constituents. We had some temporary folks in answering the phones. Our constituent services people were checking their voicemail continually. So we still provided the service.
Just to clarify, no town halls.
We did not have a town hall yet because we have, look, I've been home 4 days this year. That's how busy we have been. But yet we're doing town halls via Facebook. We have numerous people calling our office. We have met with numbers of constituents in our staff. And so we're going to remain as open and accessible as we have always been.
Let's go to Hyattsville, Maryland, Republican line. James, hi, go ahead.
Thank you for your service in the Air Force, Congressman. First thing, with the emphasis on jobs, I think people overlook the benefit of building up the military, providing those jobs for the service members. Many of those service members go on to take advantage of some form of GI Bill, which varies the way it works. But I used it. The woman that parks outside my house every day, walking to the campus, uses it. Those people also tend to get jobs or get degrees in things that are applicable for work, and that advances, the full cycle of the economy. It makes for a lot of growth. Also, all that DoD technology, the research and development, that does an awful lot for stimulating jobs all over the country.
And you're absolutely right. Go into any city or town across America where they're possibly or potentially looking at closing a military base there and see the repercussions of that. Everybody, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, they rally together to keep those bases open. Why? Because they bring a lot of economic development and a lot of money into those communities for exactly the reasons that you're mentioning. And you go to any business across the nation and you're going to find a number of veterans who are working in those businesses. And as a small business owner in the past, we hired veterans because we know the type of training that they had. We knew that the leadership qualities that they had that was imposed upon them, especially those who have served more than one stint in the military. Military is pretty selective nowadays. You can't just go into the military and expect to save for 20 or 30 years unless you're a performer. And so the demands that they put upon those that serve in the military are beneficial to the entire economy.
Robert, York, Pennsylvania, Independent line.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just have a quick question and a comment. I'd like to know if the defense spending includes spending for NATO and defense spending for Israel. And I'd also like to comment on the representative. He said he was a hawk, a fiscal hawk, but he's sure not a fiscal hawk when it comes to military spending. The spending on the EPA is a pittance compared to military spending, and he wants to cut EPA programs that protect people with clean water and clean air. And thanks again for taking my call there. I'll take the answer offline.
Well, thank you. Look, again, there was a time when a lot of these agencies, they were instigated to protect. But a lot of what they do now does not. It absolutely does not protect. When you look at the clean air standards that the EPA is trying to impose, they're unattainable. In my district, there is a coal-fired power plant. It is the cleanest, one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest in the nation. The owner of that power plant has gone above and beyond the minimum standards to keep that clean. The latest standards require all these power plants to improve their efficiency and clean up their emissions by a percentage. Well, when you already have the cleanest that technology will buy, then it's your cleanest power plants that are going to go away because they can't achieve anymore. So what does that leave you with? Your cleanest power plants are going to be closed because they can't achieve a higher percentage of efficiency, but yet your dirtier ones can clean up a little bit and stay. That is counterproductive to what we need. That's really nonsensical when you break it down. That's why we're saying we have to have a new approach, a new fresh approach to to our regulatory agencies to trim them down, make them smaller, more efficient, more responsive to the needs of the American people, not just their own desires to grow their agencies.
Representative Politico is reporting this morning that the Democratic representative from New Jersey, Bill Pascrell, put a privilege resolution on the floor asking for President Trump to release his tax returns. How did you vote, and what do you think of this effort?
Well, it was the way it was done was not according to the rules of the House. The privilege resolution tried to direct a committee to take action, which you cannot do through that type of action. The majority leader made a motion to table it, which the proper vote at that case was to table the motion, and I voted that way.
And what do you think about the whole effort, though, as far as getting the president to reveal his tax returns, especially with possible or not possible, but at least looking into perhaps ties to Russia in some way?
Look, it's distraction at this point. The president's been in office 4 weeks. And immediately, before he even was sworn in, there was an effort to discredit everything that he has ever said or ever done. And look, there's some things that, in fact, he himself says this morning, he said he gives himself a C or a C+ in his efforts to communicate with the American people. So he realizes that he has some things that he has to do a little better. But look, give the guy a chance. He's an outside the box thinker, which Republicans, Democrats, Independents have said for a long time. Look, the old system isn't working. Let's bring some new ideas in. Do I agree with everything that he campaigned on? Not necessarily. But we also know that, as my parents said, you're known by the company you keep. And he surrounded himself with some pretty smart people that also have new ideas. So look, the old system isn't working. Let's try something new. Let's try something fresh and go outside the box. I think one of the strong points of Donald Trump is he is a businessman. I think that's strong. But the other thing is he's an outsider. He doesn't know that you can't accomplish some of the things in Washington he's wanting to do, and that's why I think we'll actually have an opportunity to accomplish it.
Our guest has been Representative Barry Loudermilk, Republican of Georgia, serving the 11th District. Thanks for your time this morning.
Well, thank you, Pedro. I appreciate it.
Coming up, we're going to hear from another representative, New York Democrat Representative Adriano Espaillat. He'll discuss the Trump administration's immigration and border control policies, and he's the first Dominican American to serve in Congress. That conversation coming up when Washington Journal continues.